We are taught from an early age to see reality as something finished, a solid world, already formed, already decided, waiting passively for us to move through it. Objects seem stable. Time seems to flow in one direction. Cause leads to effect. Yet this sense of certainty may be less a truth about the universe and more a convenience of perception. What we call reality might not be a fixed structure at all, but a continuously unfolding process, one that only appears solid because of the way consciousness encounters it. At the deepest levels explored by physics, the universe does not resemble the world our senses report. Matter dissolves into patterns of probability. Particles are no longer things but tendencies, not entities, but events waiting to happen. An electron does not occupy a position until interaction occurs. Until then, it exists as a range of possibilities. Mathematically real but physically undecided. This suggests that certainty is not fundamental. It is emergent, provisional, and dependent on context. The act of observation plays a strange and unavoidable role in this process. Measurement does not merely reveal what is already there. It actively participates in bringing about a specific outcome. Before observation, there is no single reality, only a spectrum of potential realities. The universe, at its most basic level, seems less like a machine and more like a question continually answering itself. This challenges the traditional separation between observer and observed. If observation is required for reality to take shape, then consciousness cannot be treated as an afterthought. It cannot be merely a byproduct of matter if matter itself remains undefined until interaction occurs. Consciousness, in this light, begins to look less like a passenger in the universe and more like a fundamental participant in its unfolding. Long before modern physics, this intuition appeared in philosophy and mysticism. Across cultures and centuries, thinkers spoke of a unified field of being, an underlying intelligence or awareness from which form emerges. While the language differed, mind, spirit, logos, emptiness, insight was similar. Separation is not ultimate. It is a surface appearance, not a final truth. If consciousness is fundamental, then the brain may not generate awareness in the way a factory produces goods. Instead, it may function more like a filter or interface, shaping and localizing a broader field of awareness into a personal perspective. Consciousness would not be confined inside the skull, but temporarily focused there, like light passing through a lens. Everyday experience offers subtle hints of this possibility. In moments of deep concentration, the sense of being a separate observer fades. In states of flow, action happens without self-reference. In deep silence, thought subsides and awareness remains, clear and unbounded. These experiences are often dismissed as subjective anomalies, yet they may reveal something essential about the nature of mind itself. If awareness can exist without constant thought, then thought cannot be its source. Thought becomes content, not container. Awareness is the space in which experience appears, not the experience itself. This distinction is crucial. It suggests that consciousness is not something we have, but something we are prior to identity, memory, and narrative. From this perspective, individuality becomes a functional appearance rather than an absolute boundary. The feeling of being a separate self may be an evolutionary adaptation useful for survival, but incomplete as a description of reality. Beneath this localized viewpoint, there may be a continuous field of awareness expressing itself through countless perspectives simultaneously. Physics hints at a similar unity. Quantum entanglement shows that particles once connected remain correlated regardless of distance. Information appears to transcend space. Separation, at the quantum level, is not as absolute as classical intuition suggests. The universe behaves less like a collection of independent parts and more like a single, inseparable system. Time, too, begins to lose its solidity. While we experience time as a flowing sequence, the equations of physics do not privilege past over future. The arrow of time may arise from entropy and perception, not from fundamental law. The present moment becomes a point of intersectional place where potential collapses into experience. If consciousness operates in the present, then the present is not merely a fleeting instant. It is the only point where reality becomes actual. The past exists as memory. The future exists as possibility. Only now exists as experience. Awareness and the present moment may be inseparable aspects of the same phenomenon. This raises a profound possibility that consciousness is the mechanism through which the universe experiences itself in time, not as an external observer, but as an internal process. The universe does not merely exist, it knows, through localized points of awareness. Each conscious being becomes a window through which the cosmos looks inward. Meaning, then, is not imposed from outside. It emerges through participation. Reality is not a script we discover, but a story that unfolds through experience. The universe provides the structure of possibility. Consciousness provides the lived content. Together, they form what we call existence. This view does not grant humans a privileged position above all else. Instead, it places us within a continuum. Awareness may exist in simpler forms throughout nature, gradually increasing in complexity and human consciousness would be one expression among many, not the beginning of awareness, but a chapter in its ongoing evolution. Shanti's why the universe is not indifferent, nor is it intentional in a human sense. It is exploratory. It is a process of becoming, of experimentation, of self-discovery. Stars form, galaxies collide, life emerges, minds awaken. Each stage adds new ways for existence to experience itself. The feeling of separation that dominates daily life may be the greatest illusion of all. Not because individuality is false, but because it is incomplete. Like a wave mistaking itself for something other than the ocean, the self forgets the field from which it arises. When this is seen clearly, not intellectually but experientially, a quiet shift occurs. The need to control weakens. The fear of isolation softens. Compassion arises not as a moral rule, but as a natural recognition of shared being. Harm to another is no longer abstract. It is harm within the same field. This does not dissolve responsibility. It deepens Italiano. Every thought, every action, every moment of attention becomes part of the universe's ongoing self-expression. Nothing is trivial. Nothing is isolated. Experience matters because it is how reality knows itself. Perhaps the ultimate mystery is not how the universe began, but how it is being experienced right now. Not what exists, but what it is like to exist. Science describes structure. Consciousness reveals meaning. Neither alone is complete, and so the exploration continues not toward a final answer, but toward deeper participation. Reality does not ask to be solved. It asks to be lived, observed, questioned, and felt. In that ongoing inquiry, the boundary between knower and known grows thinner, until what remains is not a conclusion, but a continuous unfolding of awareness itself. Beyond this point, the question is no longer whether consciousness is real, but how deeply it is woven into the structure of existence. If awareness is fundamental, then reality is not a static architecture but a responsive field. It listens, it adapts, it expresses itself differently depending on how it is encountered. This does not mean the universe bends to personal desire, but that experience itself is shaped through relationship rather than isolation. In this relational view, nothing exists entirely on its own. Every phenomenon arises through interaction. A particle needs a field. A thought needs awareness. An experience needs a perspective. Reality is not made of independent objects, but of events that come into being through connection. Existence is not something things possess. It is something that happens between them. This idea quietly dissolves the notion of absolute objectivity. Tere mai ve, no view from nowhere, no perspective completely untouched by context. Every observation carries the imprint of the observer, not as distortion, but as participation. The universe reveals different aspects of itself depending on how it is approached. Much like a landscape appears differently under changing light. If tease is true, then knowledge itself is not merely accumulation of facts. It is a form of relationship. To know something deeply is not only to describe it, but to be changed by the encounter. Understanding becomes an act of intimacy, not dominance. The more we know, the more we are involved. This perspective also reshapes how we think about identity. The self may not be a fixed entity, but a dynamic pattern within awareness. Memories, beliefs, and roles form a temporary structure, constantly updated and revised. Beneath these shifting patterns, awareness remains remarkably stable, like the stillness beneath moving water. When attention turns inward, this stability can sometimes be felt directly. There is a quiet presence that observes thoughts without being contained by them. It does not age. It does not hurry. It simply notices. This observing presence may be closer to our true nature than any story we tell about who we are. From here, the boundary between inner and outer begins to soften. The world is no longer experienced as something happening to us, but something happening with us. Perception becomes a meeting point rather than a one-way transmission. The colors, sounds, and sensations of the world arise in the same space as thoughts and emotions. In such moments, reality feels less like an object and more like a process. Less like a thing and more like an activity. Being is not something we possess, but something we participate in continuously. The universe is not finished. It is ongoing. This ongoing nature of reality suggests that uncertainty is not a flaw, but a feature. Openness allows for creativity. Indeterminacy allows for novelty. If everything were fully determined, there would be no room for emergence, no space for genuine change. The unknown is not an enemy of understanding, but its source. Shantis, why mystery is not a problem to be eliminated. It is the depth that gives existence, its richness. Every explanation rests upon something unexplained. Every answer opens into further questions. The attempt to close the universe into a final theory may be less meaningful than learning how to live within its openness. This does not mean abandoning science or reason. It means recognizing their scope and their limits. Science maps consciousness, experiences, meaning. Together, they form a more complete picture than either could alone. One describes how the universe behaves. The other reveals what it is like to be part of it. As awareness becomes more sensitive, even ordinary moments begin to change. A breath is no longer just air moving in and out of lungs. It becomes a rhythm shared with the environment. A sound is no longer just vibration. It is a moment of contact between world and mind. Nothing special needs to be added to experience for it to become profound. What changes is the quality of attention. When awareness is present without hurry, reality reveals layers that were always there, unnoticed. Depth is not hidden elsewhere. It is present in what is already happening. Inti Sensei awakening is not an achievement. It is a remembering, a return to a more immediate way of being. The world does not become different. Our relationship to it does. The sense of being a separate observer gradually relaxes, replaced by a feeling of participation. And yet, this participation does not erase individuality. The wave still has its unique form. The perspective remains distinct. What changes is the understanding that form does not negate unity. Difference and oneness coexists without contradiction. The universe may be vast beyond comprehension, yet it is intimate enough to be experienced directly. Every conscious moment is a point where infinity touches itself, not dramatically, but quietly, not as a revelation from outside, but as a simple fact of being aware. There may never be a final answer to what reality truly is, but perhaps the question itself is the point. The universe, through conscious beings, continues to ask what it means to exist, and in the asking, it continues to unfold. As this exploration deepens, another question quietly emerges. If reality is participatory, if awareness is woven into the fabric of existence, then what we call experience is not happening inside us alone. Experience may be the point where the universe and a perspective meet, not an internal movie playing behind the eyes, but a shared event arising at the intersection of world and awareness. This reframes perception entirely. Sight is no longer light entering a passive observer. Sound is no longer vibration striking an isolated ear. Perception becomes a dialogue. The universe offers patterns, frequencies, and forms. Awareness receives, interprets, and gives them presence. Without awareness, there may be structure, but no experience. Without structure, awareness would have nothing to encounter. Reality happens between the two. In this sense, the universe is never fully objective, and consciousness is never fully subjective. These categories belong to a simplified worldview that assumes separation at the most fundamental level. But if separation itself is emergent, then object and subject arise together, like two sides of the same process. One does not precede the other. They coarise. This co-arising may explain why attempts to locate consciousness purely in the brain always feel incomplete. Neural activity correlates with experience, but correlation is not identity. A radio signal correlates with the movement of a needle, but the signal does not originate in the needle. The brain may shape experience without producing awareness itself. If awareness is more fundamental, then it is not confined by personal history. Memory shapes identity, but awareness observes memory. Thought narrates the self, but awareness witnesses thought. When attention rests quietly, without clinging to past or future, something timeless becomes apparent, not eternal in a dramatic sense, but untouched by sequence. This timeless quality does not mean that awareness exists outside time as a separate realm. It means that time appears within awareness. Past and future arise as thoughts, images, and expectations. all appearing now. The present moment is not a point moving through time. It is the field in which time appears. Shan Tiswai. The present is not fleeting. It is continuous. What changes is content, not presence. Sensations shift, thoughts arise and dissolve. Emotions move like weather, but awareness itself remains open and unchanged, like the sky through which clouds pass. This realization subtly alters the experience of life. Urgency softens, not because nothing matters, but because meaning is no longer postponed into an imagined future. Fulfillment is not something to be reached. It is something to be recognized in the act of experiencing itself. The universe, then, is not driving toward a final state. It is not rushing toward completion. It is expressing itself in endlessly varied forms, through moments of awareness that give those forms meaning. Evolution may not be a ladder climbing upward, but a branching exploration of possibilities. Life, consciousness, and culture become ways the universe experiments with knowing itself. Each perspective adds a new angle, a new texture, a new quality of experience. Nothing is redundant. Nothing is wasted. Even confusion plays a role, because it generates questions, and questions drive exploration. From this angle, suffering is not meaningless, but neither is it required. Pain signals misalignment, fragmentation, resistance. When awareness contracts around a narrow identity, experience tightens. When awareness relaxes into openness, experience expands. This does not erase difficulty, but it changes the relationship to it. Rather than asking how to eliminate suffering, the deeper inquiry becomes how to meet experience without fragmentation. How to allow sensations, emotions, and thoughts to arise without immediately turning them into a story of separation. In this, allowing something integrates, the system becomes more coherent. Coherence may be one of the most overlooked aspects of consciousness. When truths, emotions, and sensations align, experience feels meaningful and alive. When they conflict, experience feels fractured. The universe itself may favor coherence, not as a moral rule, but as a dynamic tendency toward resonance. Quantum systems display similar behavior. Coherent states allow for stability and information transfer. Decoherence leads to fragmentation and loss of structure. Perhaps consciousness and physics mirror each other here as well, expressing the same principles at different scales. If so, then awareness is not passive. It is organizing, not by force, but by presence. Attention gathers what is scattered. Observation brings coherence to possibility. This does not imply control, but participation. The universe organizes itself through being experienced. This view quietly restores dignity to ordinary moments. A walk, a breath, a conversation are no longer trivial events occurring inside an indifferent cosmos. They are points where reality becomes conscious of itself in a specific way. No moment is repeated. No perspective is replaceable. Even forgetting plays a role. Awareness does not need to remember everything. Memory allows continuity, but forgetting allows freshness. Each moment arrives unburdened by the need to justify itself. Experience renews itself endlessly. The mind often resists this openness. It seeks conclusions, certainty, closure. But reality does not seem structured around closure. It unfolds, transforms, and reconfigures. Endings exist locally, but the process continues. Awareness does not stop when a thought ends. It remains. Perhaps this is why silence feels profound. In silence, the compulsion to define relaxes. Experience is allowed to be what it is, without interpretation. In that space, the boundary between inner and outer becomes less rigid. There is simply presence without commentary. The universe may be less like a statement and more like a question. Not a question demanding an answer, but one that invites participation. Each conscious moment becomes a response, not in words, but in being. And so the exploration continues, not toward a destination, but as an ongoing relationship. Reality reveals itself through awareness, and awareness discovers itself through reality. Neither stands alone. Neither is complete without the other. In this unfolding, there is no final authority, no ultimate observer standing apart. There is only the continuous play of experience, knowing itself from within. The universe does not need to be solved. It needs to be encountered. And in that encounter, quietly, without announcement, the sense of separation loosens. What remains is not an answer, but a deeper intimacy with existence itself. At this depth of reflection, even the idea of a journey begins to soften. There is no clear starting point and no final arrival. What we call progress is often just a change in perspective, a subtle reorientation of attention. Awareness does not move forward. It opens. It does not accumulate truth. It reveals what was already present beneath layers of interpretation. The need to define reality precisely may itself arise from uncertainty, from the discomfort of not knowing. Yet the universe seems entirely comfortable with ambiguity. Quantum systems thrive on indeterminacy. Life adapts through unpredictability. Consciousness itself flows most freely when it is not constrained by rigid conclusions. Perhaps clarity does not come from answers, but from intimacy, from staying with experience long enough that it no longer needs explanation. In this staying, the mind relaxes its grip, and reality is allowed to be felt directly, without translation. In such moments, the boundary between thought and silence becomes thin. Meaning is no longer something extracted from experience. It is inherent in the act of experiencing. Awareness does not point toward truth. It is the space in which truth appears. The universe, then, does not demand belief or certainty. It invites presence. It unfolds whether we understand it or not, but it is known only through attention. To be aware is already to participate in its becoming, and so, without conclusion, without resolution, the unfolding continues. Each moment offers itself as it always has, not as an answer, but as an opening.